Sheets of rain pattered against the shingles in rhythms reminiscent of the brownies' drums. Under the cover of his eyelids, Terracon found himself still dancing, shifting his weight and stomping his feet. The gravel hissed defiantly as foot after foot cracked the ground. His tunic was soaked with sweat. Overhead, a flash of lightning illuminated the curling seams of tumbling sable clouds. Angry zephyrs shoved their way down the gorges, tore crying branches and rustling leaves from their trees, and stung bitterly as they crashed into the depths of Terracon's dream. Rain puddled beneath him. Lightning cracked loudly as it tumbled over his slumber. He pushed himself from the muddy, stomped pool in which he waded waist deep. Terracon started from his sleep with a gasp that violently drew him to sit up. His linen tunic was soaked, whether with sweat or rain he could not know. Squalls showered him through the stable's windows, and sheets of rain pattered loudly against the slate shingles overhead in reminiscent rhythms. The pattern of the droplets echoed some other time, some other experience. It was a scrap of a moment that drew him out of his bed, a moment he had already gnawed on, and he never wanted to sample again. He left Cassandra to rest on their pillow of damp straw, slipped on his leather boots, and peeked his head out from under the stable's lintel. His brown eyes flinched fearfully from the rain as he stared up into the clouds. He took things for granted, but only now in its absence could he recognize how much he missed it. Maybe this was a lesson he could learn and use to prepare for the future. Maybe this is what Cassandra felt for him. Something was missing now, and he had taken it for granted. On any other night he might have happily resolved this with sleep, or accepted it as the time lost to the mysterious demon. This would not be resolved, though. His doubts were not being washed away. Where was the sanctity of this rain? It felt dirty, used. Each drop that cracked against his skin had already fallen over him once. The sweet scent of ash from the evening's bonfire still lingered, and the air still itched from the dry caress of summer pollen. Where was the clean fragrance? Why did the rains only pour over, not wash away, the decay? Why had he taken that refreshment for granted? Why was it missing now? Terracon? Cassandra interrupted his fruitless rhetorical inquiry. What are you doing? She stopped suddenly, and cast an inquisitive look into the heavens. You do not feel it? He asked, frightened that he was not alone. Something was missing, and she definitely did not feel it. Its vacancy was so broad it swallowed up all of her words, so that she could only stare back at him aghast and silent. By black magic, hissed Nesu as he spotted them on his way up the slope. He was angrily towing Nikken behind him, nearly letting the short man fall several times. Help them, Nesu spat at Nikken, then turned his fury on Terracon and Cassandra. Get back inside! Wake the others, grab your things, and get them stowed on the wagon. I will be back shortly. Nesu? Cassandra started. Move! His tone was low, but there was a glint of fear in his eye too unusual and dark to deny. Nesu continued to mount the summit, clearly heading for the kobold tent that overlooked the valley. Quickly, Nikken rasped. What is it? They pressed as Nikken pushed them back under the lintel and out of the rain. Under the shadows of the stable, they crouched close beside him, their attention spared for nothing but his words. The fairy are here. Terracon turned on his heel and tripped into Daryl's, then Eloise's stalls. The young silver-blonde captain yelped as Terracon woke them with the news. How? Cassandra blurted as she fell back to her stall to grab her cloak and shoes. I know not. Nikken waddled to the far pens that kept the Krellos, whose snoring had lulled everyone to sleep for the past couple nights. Nesu had said that I have brought them, but I cannot understand how. The rain, the thought dawned on Cassandra. It was raining the night you rescued me. That is why it felt the same? Terracon probed. It is the same storm, Cassandra confirmed, and we were in it. Cassandra suddenly grew pale. We do not have much time. The rain will tell them where we are. Terracon looked over the wall to the next pen. Karen, come on! He shoved her shoulder. We do not have much time. Daryl and Eloise crouched under the lintel, peeking around the doorframe for any sign of the Fae. A clattering ruckus was building in the valley below, but the night storm obscured any details through the distance. Nikken slid past the soldiers, towing on reins a pair of wide-eyed bipedal amphibians. Somebody grab the unicorns. Nesu had said there was a cart. We loaded it this afternoon, Jarl began. It is right around the corner. Go! Show me! Cassandra gasped loudly from the shadowed depths of the stable. Terracon wheeled back around to see her hands clasped over her mouth. Ramses? She mumbled. Ramses! She recognized. Terracon had forgotten her unicorn. He had wrestled it out from Melanie only to have lost it at Umsa. Its presence now seemed miraculous. Monster! Nickon barked as he jumped to look at Cassandra over the stable's windowsill. An awful ride. A last resort. But why is Ramses here? Cassandra asked as she fitted the blanket and saddle over the mount's back. Terracon had him, Nickon confessed, seemingly absent of the building fury in Cassandra's voice or the blush draining from Terracon's complexion. Terracon quickened his pace around the corner of the stable, trying to keep as much distance between Cassandra and him as possible. Cassandra wrestled to keep the unicorn's head down to squeeze him out of the tiny stable. Her amethyst eyes pinched a furious glare at Terracon. You took Ramses? I thought he might be useful in finding you. Cassandra pried the black unicorn out from under the lintel and pursued the others. Her tight grasp on the reins seemed to drag the animal behind her. You took Ramses? She hissed between gritted teeth as she came down on Terracon. You took Ramses and then you left him back there? I cannot believe you. You forget my boots, but you take my prize courser? Brilliant! The fervor of their spat had distracted them from the closing cacophony of the defending brownies, but it could not detract from the painful crack of hooves against Terracon's brow. A dark-robed troll had swung around the stable roof's eaves to kick Terracon back through a window. Terracon landed hard on his shoulders and coughed out a breath, but nothing compared to the pulsing swell growing over his eye. Cassandra screamed, dropping Ramses' rein and her arguments to run back inside. The troll rolled through his landing across the trodden stabled floor. Darrell leapt after, bounding his mass against all reason onto and over the stable's windowsill. Terracon recoiled on the floor, unable to muster the strength to pull himself up. Cassandra caught the door frame to ease her turn under the lintel and into the stable. The troll had already sprung, diving its black nails to gash at Terracon's heart. A swift kick from a leather boot juggled the troll out of its flight and into the air, where Karen landed a perfect punch. Her combination assault cast the creature out through the large stable window by which it had entered and across the grassy knoll. Come on, Darrell said as he wove Terracon's arm over his shoulder to crush him up. Karen, come on! Cassandra hollered, and she let Terracon and Darrell out of the stable once more. The glow of sprites reflected in every drop of rain pouring down around them. Paranoia flooded them with fear of any blind spot. Cassandra and Darrell ducked away from the eaves, not knowing what might shoot around the next, while Terracon only stumbled as he tried to duck the pain coursing through his head. Refugee brownies were starting to crest the hill, all scratching their way against the nipping fay to find refuge with their patron demon. Get him on the cart, Cassandra ordered. I will hold them off. Youth and fury coalesced in her. She was not sure how she would fare. She had only momentary samples of experience to supplement her mother's teachings. Cassandra knew Darrell stood no chance. He was a human, and against these numbers could not resist their glamour. She tempered her will. A still mind was the only sound defense, fascination her only weapon. Burning, cursing, cramping, these corporeal tortures had no traction against the aspect, the will, the coincidence of consciousness. As elusive as concept was to grasp, so difficult would it be to target and strike. Darrell hobbled Terracon away from and around the stable. The captain's dragging weight made him a prime target for the blustering winds that curled themselves into fairies. They darted at the soldiers, sparks spitting from their tracks. Cassandra turned her back and fanned her black silk cloak. The folds of the cape pitched open as they caught the sylphs. The black silk sailed against the mast of Cassandra's weight, anchored defiantly in place. Karen stepped out from under the lintel of the stable, half-dressed and holding an iron short-sword. The reins matted her hair and bled dark stains down her tunic as she took a space beside Cassandra. Go, I will hold them off. Cassandra turned a stunned glance at the brunette. Karen, we are not... Karen lunged forward and cleaved an oncoming troll with the iron sword. The attack riled Cassandra, aware of the pressing danger. The bound of the next troll to attack stalled as Cassandra wrenched control of its hooves away. A fated stumble cracked the bone in the fall, settling the troll to a patch of grass before her. The fairies would be harder to address. A brownie came running, being pestered and picked at by the nails of a pixie. Cassandra grabbed her by the arm and pulled her to the ground, rolling her over and onto the pixie. The brownies stood quickly, but could hardly spare Cassandra a glance of appreciation before scampering further on her escape. The pixie, half smashed in the ground, now had a new target. It sunk into the dirt and burrowed under the grass, heaving up a snaking mound that coursed directly toward the princess. The hiss of Karen's iron blade into the earth stunted the furrow from coming closer. Cassandra could only alter the fairies' course, steering them from one place to another. That sword was the only thing that could stop the fairies. Karen's fencing took time, though, and moments spent to one side left her open to attack from the other. Cassandra could weave the fairies from side to side, but their approach was inevitable. The drops of rain began to burn. Sprites had sharpened the drops into icy knives that bit and ripped as they landed. "They are rained!" Nicken hollered as the Krellos pulled the cart around. "Hurry!" Eloise cooed Terracon while Darrell drew his iron sword from the luggage. The rain soaked the ground, slipping their steps to render them more susceptible. Mud splashed beneath the trampling feet of the brownies as they stampeded past Cassandra and Karen. A human village would have been better prepared against this kind of infestation. Almost no house goes without several sets of iron bells. Brownies, however, were not metallurgists or smiths. They worked their patties with wood and sharpened stone. The few bells they traded for dangled and tinkered around the necks of children who screamed against their mothers' breasts. Besides, the sound of metal could only detract a fairy, drive it out. It could not quell their cruelty. The malignant little creatures with their iridescent skin and berserk smiles were gathered over them in swarming clouds, pouring over them like the rain. A lone will could only wrestle against nature or beg its compliance. Now, more than ever, pressed against the circumstance of the environment, it was clear that the witches were nothing more than humans. Cassandra was no more used to these people than she had been to herself in Orkhan's cuffs. Then a voice, low and rumbling at first, then louder, grew into a roar so thunderous that it rivaled the heavens in their anger. Orkhan's head was lifted against the cutting rain, his yellow tusks and teeth breaking open the dam of his immersing bellow. The chiming of the infant's bells and clatter of raindrops on the stable's shingles, the drumming patter of feet, the flutter of the fairies' beating wings were all silenced by Orkhan's blare. The tremble in the demon's throat echoed through the gorges and mountain passes between the silver-stitched seams of the mock storm overhead. Every canal, every hollow, the vacant space of an open mouth or interior curl of an ear, all teemed with the vibration. The scream even pierced the empty thoughts and hearts, quelling the unanswered inquiries and quenching the hypothetical hungers with an omnipresence. Orkhan's cry resonated through the fabric of reality, woven with perspective of every observer present or absent since the moment sequence set consequence in motion, echoing through the passage of time until even it felt Orkhan's cry. Infidel and vain curses were spoken about this plane that only demon's eye could see. There was no mystery in the world, where those who can say Tawesh quelled their curiosity with time. Here, curiosity was quelled without time. Any perspective on any subject needed only a moment's worth of attention, and Orkhan, the patron of lost time, could spare a moment. Where imaginative figures, like horses, might once have been inspired in the rolling of billowy clouds, now there was only a ceiling of coiled darkness, too knotted to move. Every streaking drop of rain hung in the air, waiting to finish its fall. The breast-muffled cries of the brownie children were silent in the space between the waves of Orkhan's resonation. Their parents were balanced against reason, mid-gait in their escape. The rings and splashes of their tread through the puddles stalled from expanding any further. The curious anatomy of the contorted pixies found no better examination than at this moment. Their bones were flexed as easily as muscle. Their skin had the complexion of wet bark. The fairies' eyes were filled with darkness, void of any compassion or regard. There was a moment between the malignancy of the unseelie court and the misery of its victims, and that was the moment Orkhan called on. He had cried out for this moment, and it presented itself to him, displayed itself to him, offered itself on his altar. Orkhan was familiar with the moment between malignance and misery, but his dark eyes were filled with compassion. He would sacrifice the Fae and save his brownies from their affliction. Orkhan crossed the field. His skin and hair mopped up the droplets that hung in his path, creating a tunnel of dry air through the deluge. The blades of grass and meadows flowers wilted as soon as he tread on them. He laid a hand on Rusty, whom was locked between two moments. The caress was calm. She could not affect him with her tactile euphoria. Those sensations required time to change him, and there was no time. Even still, she was beautiful. Her body was an accumulation of expression, intricacy, and intrigue. Every curl of her horns, whip of her hair, and perk in her muscle was a labyrinth in which he could get lost. He would miss her. "Go with them," he said. Rusty heard him, turned her head, and lavished him with a long, pitiful look. He resigned from her gaze and stared resolutely at the brownies. "As my lord wishes," Rusty resigned. The blades of grass would not yield to the print of her paws, so she carefully stepped only where Orkhan already had. Rusty followed Orkhan as he cut a path through the rain for her and placed her lovingly on the cart with a soft kiss. Without another glance, he attended to Nicken, Darrell, and Eloise, who only stared in awe at the paused environment. He skipped Tarkhan. The captain was already safe on the cart, and granting him extra time would only result in his enduring a longer period of pain. Orkhan pressed his hand to Nesu, who took one look at the world and immediately darted for the cart. The demon passed next to Cassandra and Karen. Karen started at Orkhan's touch but stalled. "By the Tawesh." "What?" Cassandra tried. Only the demons and Nesu seemed unimpressed by the world without its storming winds and without the thunder of the lightning, which was fixed in the sky. "What have you done, Orkhan?" "There is no time, especially to explain," Orkhan joked. "Get on the cart and go. I will deal with this." Cassandra felt relieved. Orkhan would deliver these brownies from their torment. It was not out of her hands. After his kindness, however, Cassandra found it hard to abandon Orkhan. "Go, child," Orkhan pressed. Cassandra climbed into the cart, then turned back to lift in Karen. The Major was still in the field. "Karen," Cassandra shouted, "come on!" "No, I'm not coming." "Karen, Orkhan can handle this." The demon had already started ripping fairies from the sky. Myriad entrails were dragged in long scratches as he clawed fairies off and apart from the still brownies. His trail, wiped dry of rain, was sprinkled with the glittering dust. Still, Karen was not impressed enough to move. "I'm not going back," declared. "I have nothing to go back for. Reimu is dead, Draco is dead, Dion is dead. How could I go home? What could I say? My troop is dead. I should be at their side, dropped cold in a ditch. How dare I still stand? What audacity I have! Their grave is my only home now. Just add my name to the scroll that was already to be laid at my mother's feet." Karen turned away. She tried to climb toward the closest troll, her sword hungry to plant itself in its heart. The drops of rain would not be torn from their place, blocking her advance. Karen huffed, but took her blade, ready to strike the moment the rain would once again fall. "General Karen," Tarkhan shouted. Karen held tight to the blade, almost leaning on it. She did not turn to look. "Karen. General Karen. You were Draco's first successor," Tarkhan shouted. "You carry the legacy of the troop. I know it hurts, but without him you are the general of the Order of Valish." Silence settled over them, almost quiet enough to hear Karen's growing pants even across the field. "Karen, please!" Her rising pants broke into a scream. With her back still turned, she cried out, "Dead! The entire troop is dead. The Order of Valish has no general." "Karen!" "Dead!" she wept. "Dead!" "Stop it!" Nesu roared. "She may die if she wills it. We must make our way. Orkhan!" "You cannot cross to Callus," the demon bellowed. "Look at the storm." Their eyes cast into the clouds. The clouds were cutting the sky southwest. "You will have to travel east." "Fine. To Kul—" Nesu started, but Orkhan hushed. "No! Do not say it. Keenir is still here even now." The relativity of Orkhan's last word weighed on every drop of rain and suspended step. The drops of rain slipped to crash among the wind-torn grass. The sheets of rain giggled and chattered across the shingles and drained down the contours of every brow and cheek. The bolt of lightning drained into its target cloud, and as Orkhan's roar drifted into the distance, a clap of thunder trembled in its place. Karen's sweaty palms slid along the grip of her short sword. Orkhan curled around to swing his barbed tail. The moment had passed. Momentum began again. An elf's pounce was intercepted by the batted tail. Every sprite's body, snatched during the intermission, was simultaneously snuffed out as a shower of fizzling, glittering confetti. Nicken cracked the whip over the Krellos twice before their wobbled wading shifted into a full gait, with the cart and unicorn in tow. The inclement weather drove the passengers in the bed beneath the tarp, leaving only Nicken to drive unsheltered through the rain. "Call Dara. Can you get us there?" Nezu hissed surreptitiously from under the tarp. The dwarf leaned into the vizier's direction and only answered with a confident, mocking snort. From under the covers of the waxed canvas, they watched Orkhan disband the fairy menace. His presence was scattered across the field. His movement was sparkling, weaving in and out of visible sight. Each pass rent fairies and pixies from their place, scattering their bodies in explosions of fluorescent sparks. Trolls thrashed against the invisible pressure that tread over them, pinning them in place for the bat of Orkhan's lethal tail. His retaliation was omnipresent. It was awful and inspiring.